The Winter Palace drowned in funereal silence on that bitter November night of 1796. The fifth day of the month surrendered to the sixth, and with it an entire epoch breathed its last. Behind gilded doors, in chambers that had witnessed 3 decades of absolute power, lay the lifeless body of a 67-year-old woman who had commanded the mightiest empire on earth. Yet the courtiers whispering in shadowed corridors spoke not of her conquests, her laws, her cities built from nothing. Their tongues wagged about something else entirely: the final hours of the most scandalous woman ever to occupy the Russian throne. A young man knelt beside the cooling corpse, his handsome features contorted by sobs. Platon Zubov, merely 29 years old, 38 years younger than the empress he mourned. He had been the last, the 23rd. For more than 3 decades, Catherine the Great had taken lovers with a boldness that shocked Europe and terrified her own court. 23 official favorites in 34 years of reign. No female ruler in human history had ever approached such a record. Each man had left his mark on the chronicles of this vast dominion. Each had received unimaginable riches. Each had learned secrets capable of toppling thrones. But who were these men truly? Devoted paramours burning with genuine passion, or cold-blooded hunters stalking proximity to unlimited power? For 229 years, these mysteries remained locked behind 7 seals. For 229 years, official histories told comfortable lies, sanitized versions scrubbed clean of scandal. Textbooks praised the enlightened monarch, the friend of philosophers, the modernizer of a backward nation. They neglected to mention what happened after dark, when the empress summoned young officers to her private chambers and the guards were ordered to see nothing, hear nothing. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and the world shuddered at what emerged from secret vaults. Archives belonging to the KGB had preserved documents whose very existence professional historians never suspected. Diaries penned by ladies-in-waiting, pages filled with frank descriptions of what transpired behind locked doors. Reports from the secret police, agents who tracked every movement of the empress and her entourage with obsessive precision. Personal letters exchanged between favorites, overflowing with intimate confessions and political machinations that could have ignited wars. Financial ledgers surfaced too, columns of figures that stole the breath from anyone who examined them. 1/3 of the imperial budget, the treasury of the largest nation on the planet, had been funneled into maintaining these lovers. Palaces constructed, thousands of human beings gifted as property, fortunes distributed like party favors. But the most staggering discovery awaited researchers in a special vault that had not been opened for nearly 2 centuries. There, wrapped in faded velvet, lay the personal diary of Catherine herself. In her own elegant handwriting, she had recorded dates of encounters and evaluated the merits of each man. These revelations obliterated everything scholars thought they understood about the German princess from an obscure principality who became Russian empress. The story you are about to hear rests upon these declassified materials. Every word finds confirmation in archival evidence. Every fact has been verified and cross-verified by historians with access to documents that previous generations could only dream of examining. But fair warning, this truth will shock. It will shatter the familiar image of Catherine the Great and reveal an entirely different woman lurking beneath the imperial mask. She transformed passion into a political instrument wielded with surgical precision. She paid for pleasure with millions drawn from state coffers without a flicker of remorse. She once secretly married her favorite, and until her dying breath considered herself his lawful wife before God, even as she took other men to her bed with his blessing. Prepare yourself to discover how love and power intertwined in a deadly dance lasting 3 decades. How favorites received entire provinces as gifts and assembled private armies answering only to them. How young officers underwent special selection before gaining entry to the imperial bedchamber. How jealousy spawned conspiracies, and conspiracies ended in mysterious deaths that were never investigated and quickly forgotten. This story begins not in snow-blanketed Russia, but in a tiny Prussian town called Stettin, where on the 21st of April, 1729, a girl child entered the world destined to reshape it entirely. They christened her Sophia Augusta Frederica, this squalling infant born to a provincial German prince named Christian August. Not a single soul present at that baptism could have fathomed that this wrinkled newborn would one day become the most powerful woman in all of Europe. Her family scraped by in genteel poverty, perpetually struggling to maintain appearances while creditors circled. Her father trudged through military service under the Prussian king for a salary so meager it barely covered their modest household expenses. Her mother, Johanna, descended from the once illustrious but long impoverished Holstein-Gottorp line, a woman who carried her faded pedigree like a wound that never healed. Little Sophia possessed absolutely nothing, no fortune, no remarkable beauty, no glittering prospects stretching toward the horizon. She was simply another German princess from a forgotten corner of a fragmented continent, one among hundreds of identical girls scattered across Europe's petty courts. Daughters in aristocratic families of the 18th century held little intrinsic value. They existed as bargaining chips in dynastic games, their worth measured solely by the marriages they might secure. Sophia's father scarcely acknowledged his daughter's existence, consumed entirely by his military obligations and his own frustrated ambitions. Her mother more than compensated for this paternal indifference, though not with maternal warmth or tender affection. Johanna was calculating ice wrapped in silk and propriety. She gazed upon her daughter and saw one thing only: a desperate lottery ticket, the sole escape route from provincial obscurity into something grander. The child became a project, shaped with ruthless methodology toward a single goal. Johanna drilled her daughter in foreign languages until the girl's head throbbed. She forced her through endless repetitions of complicated dance steps until small feet bled in their slippers. She demanded perfect mastery of court etiquette, the thousand subtle rules governing how to curtsy, when to speak, whom to flatter. The slightest error brought swift punishment. Johanna showed no mercy because mercy was a luxury the ambitious could not afford. She was sculpting raw material into the perfect bride for some influential prince, and raw material does not require gentleness. Sophia grew withdrawn and silent beneath this relentless pressure, a pale ghost drifting through her own childhood. But behind that mask of quiet obedience lurked something her mother never suspected, a ferociously observant intellect cataloging everything it witnessed. The girl learned early the brutal truth of her era. Only the strong survive in this world. Only those capable of calculating moves several steps ahead while concealing their true intentions behind pleasant smiles. Only those who understand that showing weakness invites destruction. These lessons carved themselves into her soul, permanent as scars. The naive child was dying slowly, and something far more dangerous was taking her place. Books became her single refuge from the crushing weight of expectation. Sophia devoured volumes with ravenous hunger, consuming everything in her father's modest library. Voltaire's razor wit, Montesquieu's political philosophy, the wisdom of ancient Greek and Roman thinkers, all became her secret tutors, whispering forbidden knowledge into eager ears. By 13 years of age, this thin slip of a girl understood politics and philosophy more deeply than most grown men strutting through European courts in their powdered wigs. She grasped the hidden mechanisms driving power, studied the history of palace coups with analytical detachment, dissected the fatal mistakes of fallen monarchs. While other girls her age fantasized about gowns and handsome suitors, Sophia prepared for something else entirely. She could not yet name what destiny awaited her, but some instinct whispered that fate had marked her for grandeur. That quiet voice in her chest never lied. Somewhere beyond the dreary walls of her impoverished home, beyond the petty humiliations of noble poverty, something vast and terrifying and magnificent was waiting. She needed only to survive long enough to claim it. And survival, young Sophia had already learned, required becoming someone else entirely, someone harder, colder, infinitely more patient than the frightened child she still appeared to be. The winter of 1742 shattered the monotonous rhythm of the family's existence like a stone hurled through glass. A messenger arrived from distant, snow-buried Russia, bearing a letter that made Johanna's hands tremble as she read. Empress Elizabeth Petrovna was searching for a bride to wed her nephew Peter, heir to the Russian throne. The imperial gaze had fallen upon their obscure Sophia. Johanna could scarcely breathe. This was the chance she had schemed and prayed for throughout her entire bitter life. A golden ladder stretching from provincial insignificance straight to the summit of earthly power. But Sophia herself felt no such elation. Rumors had reached even their backwater corner of Europe about this prospective groom. They painted a troubling portrait. A sickly youth, mentally deficient, pathologically obsessed with toy soldiers and military miniatures, while genuine affairs of state bored him to yawning. Courtiers whispered that his mind had never properly developed, that he remained essentially a child trapped in an adolescent body. The thought of binding herself to such a creature for life made Sophia's stomach clench. Yet she understood with cold clarity that her opinion counted for nothing. Princesses did not choose, they were chosen. On the 10th of January, 1744, the 14-year-old girl climbed into a carriage beside her mother and departed toward an unknown future. The journey proved brutal beyond imagination. Their vehicle rattled over roads destroyed by winter, every jolt sending pain shooting through exhausted bodies. Murderous cold seeped through fur-lined blankets and heavy cloaks, gnawing at fingers and toes with teeth of ice. The endless Russian wilderness stretched in every direction, forests of skeletal birches, frozen rivers wide as lakes, horizons that never seemed to grow closer no matter how many miles they covered. Weeks of this torment crawled past, each day identical to the last. Sophia never complained, not once. She sat in silence, watching this alien landscape scroll past the frost-covered windows, and something within her crystallized into diamond hardness. There would be no return journey, she understood. Whatever awaited at the end of this frozen road, she would face it alone. Her mother would eventually go back to Stettin. Her father would continue his dreary military career. But Sophia was being delivered into another world entirely, sold to strangers in exchange for political advantage. The frightened girl she had been was a luxury she could no longer afford to remain. By the time the spires of St. Petersburg finally emerged from the winter haze, someone different sat in that carriage. February brought them at last to the Russian capital, that improbable city conjured from swampland by Peter the Great's monstrous will. Sophia was immediately presented to Empress Elizabeth and to the young man who would become her husband. That first encounter with her intended bridegroom struck her like a physical blow, though her face betrayed nothing. Peter Fedorovitch proved even worse than the cruelest rumors had suggested. Short, scrawny, his face ravaged by smallpox scars that no amount of powder could conceal. He spoke exclusively in German and made no attempt to hide his contempt for everything Russian, the language, the religion, the customs of the nation he would one day rule. His mental development appeared frozen somewhere around age 10. While Sophia stood before him attempting polite conversation, his attention kept drifting toward the corner where his collection of toy soldiers waited. 17 years old, heir to the largest empire on earth, and his greatest passion was staging miniature battles with painted wooden figures. Any other girl might have wept or pleaded to be sent home. Sophia merely smiled pleasantly, revealing not a shadow of the horror churning behind her composed exterior. Her sharp mind had already seized upon the essential truth concealed within this disaster. This pathetic creature would never become a true ruler. He lacked every quality that genuine power demanded, and where weakness existed, opportunity flourished for those bold enough to grasp it. Empress Elizabeth observed the young German visitor with shrewd, appraising eyes and recognized something that others missed, a keen intelligence and iron determination hidden beneath that demure smile. This girl was a survivor. This girl was dangerous. Perhaps Elizabeth should have sent her packing back to Stettin right then. Instead, she approved the match, sealing the fate of the Russian Empire for generations to come. Sophia had passed her first test. Many more awaited, each more brutal than the last, but she had proven something vital to herself that frozen February. She could play the game. She could deceive, endure, adapt. She could become whatever survival required. Sophia attacked the Russian language with a ferocity that left the entire court speechless. While other foreign princesses would have surrendered to homesickness and despair, this thin German girl rose before dawn each morning and studied until her candles guttered out at midnight. She memorized vocabulary while others slept, practiced pronunciation until her throat ached, forced her tongue around the unfamiliar Slavic sounds that seemed designed to defeat Western mouths. Within 6 months, this teenage foreigner spoke Russian more fluently than nobles whose families had served the throne for generations. The transformation was deliberate, calculated, ruthless in its discipline. On the 28th of June, 1744, she formally converted to the Russian Orthodox faith and received her new name, Catherine Alexeyevna. The German Princess Sophia vanished forever into the baptismal waters, and a Russian Grand Duchess emerged in her place. The following day brought her official betrothal to Peter. She was 15, he 17. Two adolescents bound together by politics, strangers who would share a bed and a throne, but never, it would prove, anything resembling genuine intimacy. No one spoke of love during the engagement celebrations. This union was pure transaction, a dynastic merger as coldly calculated as any merchant's contract. The wedding took place on the 21st of August, 1745, with magnificence designed to dazzle foreign ambassadors and remind Russian nobles of imperial power. Catherine stood before the altar, weighted down by a gown of silver cloth encrusted with enough diamonds to purchase a small province. She looked radiant, composed, every inch the future empress. Beside her, Peter fidgeted and yawned openly, checking over his shoulder as though military maneuvers awaited his attention elsewhere. His bride meant nothing to him. This ceremony meant nothing. Only his toy soldiers possessed the power to fully capture his interest. The guests pretended not to notice. That night, behind the closed doors of the bridal chamber, Catherine discovered just how strange her new life would become. Her husband showed no interest whatsoever in consummating their marriage. Instead, Peter had brought his collection of miniature soldiers to their wedding bed. He arranged them carefully on the silk sheets, deployed cavalry on the pillows, positioned infantry along the mattress edge. Then he began staging elaborate battles, complete with sound effects and whispered commands to his tiny troops. Catherine lay beside him in her wedding nightgown, staring at the painted ceiling, feeling reality crack and shift beneath her. This was her future. This was her life. The second night unfolded identically, and the third, and hundreds more, stretching into an unbroken nightmare spanning 9 years. 9 years of marriage without a single instance of physical intimacy. 9 years during which Peter continued preferring painted wooden soldiers to his living, breathing wife. He spent his nights conducting miniature warfare or drinking himself unconscious with his Prussian companions, boasting about his worship of Frederick the Great while mocking everything Russian. Empress Elizabeth raged in private. The throne required an heir, yet the Grand Duchess remained stubbornly childless. Vicious whispers multiplied through the court, some blaming Catherine's supposedly barren womb, others cautiously suggesting that Peter lacked the capacity or inclination to father children at all. Catherine endured this purgatory in silence, retreating to the palace library where books became her only companions. She wept into her pillow at night where no one could witness her despair, then dried her tears each morning and presented a serene face to a court that watched her every move. The gilded cage surrounding her was beautiful beyond imagination. Marble halls, priceless paintings, servants answering her smallest whim, yet it remained a prison nonetheless. But these years of torment were forging something new. The naive girl who had arrived from Stettin was dying by inches, poisoned by loneliness and humiliation. In her place, a different creature was slowly emerging from the chrysalis of suffering. This new Catherine had learned to conceal every genuine emotion behind an impenetrable mask. She had learned patience measured not in days, but in years. She watched, she waited, she calculated the weaknesses of everyone around her while revealing none of her own. The court saw a dutiful wife enduring difficult circumstances with admirable grace. They did not see the predator awakening behind those intelligent eyes, the cold pragmatist who understood that sentiment was suicide in this world. Empress Elizabeth was aging. Peter was despised. Power would eventually need a new hand to wield it. Young Catherine had no intention of remaining a victim forever. She was simply waiting for the proper moment to strike, and she was learning that some hungers for power, for freedom, for control of her own destiny, burned far hotter than mere loneliness. The year 1752 found Catherine balanced on the razor edge of complete despair. She had turned 23, a young woman in full bloom, trapped within a marriage that existed only on paper. 9 years bound to a man who had never once touched her as a husband should. 9 years of accumulated humiliation as courtiers snickered behind their fans and foreign ambassadors reported her barren condition to their monarchs. Peter continued his nightly rituals with toy soldiers, continued drinking himself into oblivion with Prussian officers, continued publicly mocking his wife at every opportunity. Empress Elizabeth's patience had worn dangerously thin. Without an heir, the dynasty faced catastrophe. Then, Sergei Saltykov entered Catherine's suffocating world like oxygen rushing into a sealed tomb. 26 years old, devastatingly handsome, a chamber junker whose position granted him constant access to the imperial court. Tall and elegantly proportioned, with dark eyes that glittered with knowing amusement and a smile that promised forbidden pleasures. He had mastered the art of seduction the way musicians master instruments, understanding precisely which strings to pluck and when. But something far more sinister lurked behind this convenient romance. Whispers slithered through palace corridors, suggesting that Saltykov had been deliberately assigned to the Grand Duchess on Empress Elizabeth's personal orders. The dynasty needed an heir by whatever means necessary. If Peter could not or would not perform his conjugal duties, then another man must accomplish what the lawful husband had failed to achieve. This was no spontaneous passion, but a calculated operation designed at the highest levels of power. Catherine almost certainly understood what was happening. She was too intelligent, too observant to miss the manipulation. Saltykov's sudden appearance, his aggressive pursuit, the way obstacles mysteriously cleared from his path. She recognized that she was being used as a broodmare, her body requisitioned for state purposes. The knowledge should have revolted her. Instead, something else stirred beneath her humiliation. Their first encounter occurred at a court ball where Saltykov claimed her hand for a dance. Catherine felt her heartbeat accelerate as his fingers closed around hers, felt heat spreading through a body that had known nothing but cold neglect for nearly a decade. 23 years old, starved for human warmth, aching for the touch she had been denied throughout her entire marriage. 9 years of loneliness had carved a void inside her that demanded filling. Saltykov recognized her hunger immediately and began his campaign with patient expertise. He sent passionate notes professing undying devotion. He presented flowers as though each bloom contained a secret message. He recited poetry beneath moonlit windows. Catherine attempted resistance, knowing full well that invisible hands were orchestrating every moment. But each day her defenses crumbled further as desire burned hotter. What did it matter if Elizabeth had arranged this affair? What did it matter if Saltykov was following orders? Her body screamed for release after years of imprisonment. One August night in 1752, at the summer palace of Oranienbaum, the final barriers collapsed. Peter lay unconscious in his chambers, drowned in wine as usual, surrounded by his beloved toy armies. Saltykov slipped silently through darkened corridors and entered Catherine's bedroom. At 23, after 9 years of farcical marriage, she finally experienced physical intimacy with a man. The dam shattered completely that night, releasing everything Catherine had suppressed for so long. She and Saltykov continued meeting for months afterward, their liaison an open secret that everyone discussed but no one officially acknowledged. Peter remained oblivious, too absorbed in his Prussian fantasies to concern himself with his wife's activities. Elizabeth maintained her knowing silence, waiting for results. In the winter of 1753, those results arrived. Catherine realized she was pregnant. Joy mingled with ice-cold terror. Everyone at court understood the child could not possibly belong to Peter. The Grand Duke had never once shared his wife's bed in any meaningful sense. But Elizabeth had planned for this contingency as well. She declared the forthcoming child the legitimate heir to the Russian throne, silencing any whispers with the crushing weight of imperial authority. On the 20th of September 1754, a boy entered the world, the future emperor Paul I. Peter glanced at the infant with drunken indifference and muttered words that would echo through history. "God alone knows where my wife gets her children." Elizabeth immediately seized the newborn, denying Catherine even the right to nurse her own son. Saltykov was dispatched abroad on diplomatic assignment within days, vanishing from Catherine's life forever. She wept bitterly, but the tears dried quickly. She had received a brutal education in how power operated. Men were temporary pleasures, tools to be used and discarded. Only power itself endured. The years following Paul's birth blurred into a succession of fleeting affairs that left no permanent impression on Catherine's hardening heart. She had abandoned all romantic illusions after Saltykov's calculated departure. Men became instruments for relieving tension, sources of momentary pleasure, pawns to be positioned and sacrificed as circumstances required. The court branded her a libertine and a disgrace to the dynasty, but Catherine merely smiled at the whispered condemnations. She was playing a longer game than any of her critics comprehended. While they gossiped about her bedroom activities, she observed Empress Elizabeth's declining health with the patient attention of a vulture circling weakening prey. On the 25th of December, 1761, the old empress finally surrendered to mortality. Peter III ascended to the throne he had awaited his entire stunted life, and Russia immediately began sliding toward catastrophe. The new emperor seemed determined to alienate every powerful faction in his realm with breathtaking speed and thoroughness. He worshipped Frederick the Great of Prussia with an obsession bordering on religious mania, and his first major act proved it. He signed a humiliating peace treaty that nullified every Russian victory in the brutal 7 Years' War. Thousands upon thousands of Russian soldiers had bled and died conquering Prussian territory, and Peter simply handed it all back with a stroke of his pen. The officer corps seethed with barely contained fury at this betrayal of their sacrifices. But Peter was only beginning his campaign of self-destruction. He forced the proud Guards regiments to abandon their traditional Russian uniforms and don hated Prussian attire. He openly mocked the Orthodox Church, calling Russian religious practices barbaric superstitions fit only for ignorant peasants. Nobles who had supported the throne for generations found themselves marginalized, while Prussian advisors gained the emperor's ear. Discontent metastasized through every level of society. Peter's reign would last precisely 186 days before ending in blood and conspiracy. Catherine watched her husband's spectacular blunders with growing certainty that her moment was rapidly approaching. It was during this volatile period that Grigory Grigorievich Orlov exploded into her life. A 27-year-old officer in the Izmailovsky Guards Regiment, he represented everything Peter was not. Enormous in stature, blessed with powerful hands that could crush a man's skull, His ruggedly handsome face bore a saber scar from a duel in which he had killed his opponent with a single devastating blow. Orlov possessed no aristocratic pedigree, hailing instead from a modest, noble family of limited means. But he radiated something that money could never purchase: raw, masculine energy and absolute fearlessness. He had 4 brothers, all serving in the guards, all commanding fierce loyalty among their fellow soldiers. Their first encounter happened by apparent chance in the summer garden. Orlov stood guard duty while Catherine passed with her attendants. Their eyes met, and something primal ignited between them. He looked at her, not with the calculating assessment of a courtier seeking advancement, but with undisguised hunger for the woman herself. No deference, no fear, no flattery, simply a man desiring a woman with elemental directness. Catherine felt herself responding to that gaze in ways she had nearly forgotten her body could experience. Within a week, they had become lovers, and for the first time in years, Catherine felt genuinely alive. This rough soldier gave her what no polished aristocrat ever had. Their affair became public knowledge almost immediately. Orlov visited her openly, stayed through the night, departed only at dawn. Peter remained characteristically oblivious, too intoxicated by his Prussian fantasies to notice or care what his wife did. By summer of 1762, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again, and this time the father was unmistakably Grigory Orlov. When Peter learned of this condition, his reaction proved explosive. He threatened to imprison Catherine in a convent, strip her of all titles, declare her unborn child a bastard with no claim to succession. The Grand Duchess understood with crystalline clarity that hesitation now meant destruction. Either she acted immediately or she lost everything: her freedom, her position, possibly her life itself. The Orlov brothers began orchestrating the most audacious conspiracy in Russian history. They moved through guards regiments distributing money, spreading rumors about Peter's treasonous intentions, cultivating officers who despised their Prussian-loving emperor. Grigory swore an oath while staring directly into Catherine's eyes. "You will be empress, or I will die attempting to make you one." The night spanning June 27th and 28th, 1762, became the hinge upon which history turned. Peter was celebrating at Oranienbaum, drunk and oblivious. At 5 in the morning, Alexei Orlov burst into Catherine's chambers at Peterhof with urgent words. "The hour has come. The guards await." Within hours, regiments knelt before their new sovereign, crying out, "Long live our mother Catherine!" 6 days later, Peter signed his abdication. 1 week after that, he was discovered dead in Ropsha. The official explanation cited hemorrhoidal colic. Everyone knew the truth. Alexei Orlov had strangled the former emperor with his own hands. Catherine became empress at 33, pregnant by her lover, possessing not a single legitimate claim to the Russian throne. Beside her stood Grigory Orlov, the man who had delivered her this blood-soaked crown, already calculating his reward. Grigory Orlov had gambled everything on Catherine's ascension, and now he expected payment commensurate with his risks. He had organized the conspiracy that toppled an emperor. His brother's hands had squeezed the life from Peter's throat. Without the Orlov clan, Catherine would still be a humiliated Grand Duchess trapped in a sham marriage, or worse, rotting in some remote convent while her husband cavorted with his Prussian idols. The debt she owed was incalculable, and Grigory knew precisely what currency he wished to collect. He wanted nothing less than the imperial crown itself, placed upon his head by the woman he had elevated to supreme power. Catherine showered him with rewards that would have satisfied any reasonable man. She bestowed upon him the title of Count, elevating his modest family to the highest ranks of Russian nobility. She pinned upon his chest the Order of St. Andrew the First Called, the most prestigious decoration the empire could offer. She granted him vast territorial holdings stretching across thousands of miles, lands that generated income sufficient to fund a small army. In the heart of St. Petersburg, she commissioned the construction of the Marble Palace, an architectural masterpiece that devoured 2 million rubles from the state treasury. 17,000 serfs became his property, meaning nearly 90,000 human souls, including their families, now belonged to him absolutely. But Grigory Orlov's appetite far exceeded estates and decorations. During the winter of 1764, he made his move. They sat alone in Catherine's private chambers, firelight dancing across the walls while a blizzard howled beyond frost-covered windows. Without warning, Grigory dropped to one knee before the empress he had created. His words fell like stones into still water. "Katerina, marry me. I made you empress. Now make me emperor. We shall rule together as equals, sharing both throne and bed until death claims us." The silence that followed stretched into eternity. Catherine gazed upon this powerful, beautiful man and felt two opposing forces warring within her chest. She loved Grigory Orlov, perhaps more genuinely than she had loved any man before. He was courageous, fiercely devoted, magnificent in his passion. He had risked execution to place her on the throne when safer men cowered in shadows. He had given her a son, Alexei, born secretly in April of 1762 and hidden away under the surname Bobrinsky to protect both mother and child from scandal. Part of Catherine yearned to accept his proposal, to know the comfort of ruling beside a man who truly loved her rather than her position. But another part, the cold, calculating sovereign who had survived decades of palace intrigue, recognized the catastrophe such a marriage would unleash. Grigory was a superb soldier and a passionate lover, but he possessed neither the education nor the temperament for governance. He was impulsive where statecraft demanded patience, blunt where diplomacy required subtlety, violent where wisdom counseled restraint. He could lead a cavalry charge or organize a coup, but managing ministers, negotiating with foreign powers, balancing the competing interests of noble factions, these arts lay entirely beyond his capabilities. Worse still, Russian nobility would never accept a common guardsman as emperor consort. They had tolerated Catherine seizing the throne because she had married into the dynasty, however unhappily. Elevating her lover to equal status would ignite rebellions she might not survive. Catherine shook her head slowly and spoke the words that would forever alter their relationship. She explained that Russia could never accept him as emperor, that foreign powers would refuse recognition, that the nobility would revolt against a guardsman wearing the crown. Grigory's expression transformed from hopeful anticipation to wounded fury. His voice emerged as a growl. "So I was useful only for the dirty work. Conspiracies and murders, those you permitted. But now that you sit securely on your throne, I become disposable?" Catherine reached for his hands, attempting to soften the blow she had delivered. She promised he would always remain at her side, as lover, as confidant, as father of her hidden child, but never as husband. That door was permanently sealed. Grigory wrenched free from her grasp and stormed from the chamber, the door slamming behind him with thunderous finality. This moment cracked the foundation of their bond, creating a fissure that would only widen with passing years. Yet they remained lovers for 4 more years as Catherine attempted compensating for her rejection through limitless generosity. When Grigory presented her with the legendary Orlov diamond, a stone of 189 carats, she ordered it mounted in the imperial scepter, where it still glitters today. But the damage proved irreparable. Orlov began drinking heavily, gambling away fortunes, taking other women to his bed without discretion. Catherine knew of every betrayal and burned with jealousy she dared not express. Then came the summer of 1772, bringing scandal that would bury their decade-long romance forever. Grigory fell madly in love with his own 13-year-old cousin, Ekaterina Zinovieva, and demanded imperial permission to marry the girl. Catherine granted consent with a frozen heart, added another 200,000 rubles and 5,000 serfs to his already obscene fortune, and dispatched him abroad on diplomatic assignment. The first official favorite departed Russia in March, carrying his child bride and his mountains of wealth. He would never again share Catherine's bed, but during their tempestuous years together, Orlov had extracted more than 17 million rubles from the state treasury. He entered history as Catherine's first great love. The 22nd had yet to come, and the most extraordinary still awaited her. After Orlov's departure, the court exhaled with collective relief. The crude soldier, the violent upstart who had presumed to grasp at the imperial crown, finally gone from their perfumed midst. But Catherine herself felt no such liberation. Grigory had loved her authentically, wanting the woman named Katerina rather than the empress commanding millions. All who followed would desire only the crown upon her head, the power flowing from her signature, the wealth she could bestow with a casual wave. She was 45 years old and convinced that genuine passion belonged permanently to her past. 3 unremarkable favorites passed through her chambers over the following 2 years. Pretty young men, suitable for physical release, but incapable of stimulating her restless intellect. Then Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin detonated into her existence, and everything Catherine believed about herself shattered into glittering fragments. He was 35 years old when he demanded her attention with an audacity that bordered on madness. Physically, he represented the opposite of courtly elegance. Enormous in stature, carrying considerable bulk on his massive frame, his face bore the marks of a brawl that had cost him his left eye years earlier. The empty socket gave him a piratical appearance that would have seemed grotesque on another man. His hair refused all attempts at fashionable arrangement, exploding in wild tangles that no amount of pomade could tame. His uniforms perpetually appeared slept in rather than worn. Yet this one-eyed giant possessed something that no handsome favorite could match, a genius-level intellect combined with charisma that could fill a cathedral. He was a brilliant military commander who had proven his courage against Turkish armies. He was a sophisticated diplomat capable of outmaneuvering the wiliest European statesmen. He could discourse for hours on philosophy, art, history, and theology, quoting ancient poets in their original Greek while accompanying himself on guitar. He sang orthodox liturgical music with a voice that brought tears to listeners' eyes. Potemkin was a force of nature compressed into human form, barely contained by flesh and bone. He had participated in the coup of 1762, standing among those guardsmen who had helped Catherine seize power. But she had never truly noticed him then, her vision filled entirely by Grigory Orlov's golden magnificence. 10 years Potemkin had waited, serving in distant campaigns, distinguishing himself in battle after battle, collecting medals and promotions while nursing his ambition. He returned to St. Petersburg in the winter of 1774, celebrated as a war hero whose strategic brilliance had helped humble the Ottoman Empire. On the 4th of March, he appeared at a court reception where Catherine sat enthroned, receiving the adulation of her subjects. Potemkin approached, bowed, and spoke words that made every witness gasp in disbelief. He declared that 10 years earlier he had helped place her upon this throne, and that since that day he had waited for his proper reward. Now he had come to claim what destiny owed him. Courtiers froze in horror at such brazen presumption. Speaking to the empress in this manner invited imprisonment, or worse. But Catherine did not summon guards or order punishment. Instead, she rose from her throne and approached this disheveled cyclops with something unfamiliar kindling in her eyes. What reward did he imagine he deserved? She inquired softly. Potemkin met her gaze with his single eye, dark, intense, absolutely unafraid, and answered with a single word that contained universes of meaning. Her. That very evening, he crossed the threshold of the imperial bedchamber and ignited a conflagration that would burn for 18 years. What erupted between Catherine and Potemkin transcended anything she had previously experienced. This was not mere physical attraction or political convenience, but something far more consuming and terrifying. She wrote him dozens of letters daily, addressing him as her golden pheasant, her tiger, her lion of the jungle, her very soul given human shape. He responded with earthier endearments, calling her his little mother, his dove, his own Katerina. He would spend hours lying at her feet with his enormous head resting in her lap while she stroked his unruly hair. Then suddenly he would leap up, pacing like a caged beast, gesturing wildly as he outlined grandiose visions, conquering the Crimean Peninsula, constructing fleets to dominate the Black Sea, crushing Turkish power forever, expanding Russian dominion to the ancient walls of Constantinople itself. Catherine listened with her breath suspended, feeling not like an empress managing a subordinate, but simply a woman intoxicated by the man she loved. For the first time in her 45 years, she experienced what poets described and philosophers analyzed: complete romantic surrender to another human being. The calculating sovereign who trusted no one found herself trusting absolutely. The woman who had learned to conceal every genuine emotion discovered she could hide nothing from this penetrating single eye. Potemkin saw through every mask she had constructed over decades, recognized the lonely girl still hiding beneath the imperial magnificence, and loved her anyway. It was glorious. It was terrifying. It would transform both of them and the empire they ruled together in ways neither could have predicted. During the summer of 1774, something occurred that historians would debate for more than 2 centuries until archives opened and silenced all skeptics with documentary proof. Catherine and Potemkin stood before a priest in the small Church of the Ascension in Moscow, far from curious courtiers and wagging tongues. Only 2 witnesses attended, trusted confidants of Grigory Alexandrovich, who would carry this secret to their graves. The ceremony was brief, the surroundings modest, the implications staggering. The Empress of all Russia married her one-eyed lover in a morganatic union that granted him no claim to the throne, but bound them together before God as husband and wife. Catherine wanted to belong to Potemkin completely, sealed by sacred vows rather than mere physical passion. She had refused Orlov's proposal because he sought to become emperor, to share her power as an equal. But Potemkin understood her differently. He desired her soul, not her crown. The marriage certificate, discovered in KGB archives, bore the priest's signature alongside notation of the date and location. What had seemed romantic legend proved historical fact. The most powerful woman in Europe had secretly wed a man of comparatively modest origins, and she considered herself his lawful spouse until her dying breath. Every subsequent lover would be, in her mind, merely a temporary substitute for the husband she could never publicly acknowledge. But something strange and dark began festering in their relationship almost immediately after the vows were exchanged. Potemkin revealed himself to be monstrously jealous, consumed by suspicions that bordered on paranoid delusion. He erupted in volcanic rages at the slightest provocation, screaming accusations at Catherine, hurling precious objects against walls, demanding to know which courtier had caught her wandering eye. The Empress wept and swore her absolute fidelity, clutching his massive hands while pleading for calm. But Grigory saw threats everywhere, in every handsome officer who bowed too deeply, every ambassador whose compliments seemed too warm, every servant whose glance lingered too long. These tempests of jealousy threatened to destroy them both. Catherine could not conduct affairs of state while constantly defending herself against imaginary infidelities. Potemkin could not function as her chief advisor while tormented by visions of betrayal lurking behind every door. Their passionate union was devouring itself from within, and so Catherine proposed a solution so bizarre, so contrary to every norm of marriage and morality, that it would have horrified anyone who learned of it. She suggested that Potemkin himself should select her future lovers. He would identify candidates, evaluate their suitability, test their capabilities personally, and present only approved men for her intimate companionship. This way, he would always know exactly who shared her bed and under what circumstances. The arrangement defied all logic of human emotion. What husband willingly procures lovers for his own wife? What wife requests such procurement from the man she has married? Yet Potemkin agreed to this monstrous bargain, and the agreement held for the next 18 years until death finally separated them. He would control every aspect of Catherine's romantic life, transforming jealousy into management, suspicion into supervision. The temporary favorites who followed would all pass through his hands first, interviewed, inspected, approved, or rejected according to criteria only he fully understood. Catherine gained young lovers without the political complications of independent romantic entanglements. Potemkin retained power and influence even when physically absent from the capital on military campaigns. An unofficial position emerged within the court, never recorded in any formal document but understood by everyone who mattered. The title whispered in corridors was temporary favorite. Young officers selected by Potemkin, granted the rank of adjutant, installed in luxurious palace apartments, and delivered to the empress like merchandise displayed for inspection. Each candidate received generous salary from state coffers before even entering the imperial bedchamber. Those who pleased Catherine could expect titles, estates, thousands of serfs, fortunes beyond imagination. Those who disappointed faced swift removal and comfortable exile with generous severance. The system operated with mechanical precision, transforming imperial passion into bureaucratic process. This arrangement strikes modern sensibilities as perverse, perhaps even pathological, but it functioned with remarkable effectiveness for nearly 2 decades. Catherine and Potemkin remained bound by their secret marriage, even as other men came and went from her bed. She wrote him constantly, addressing him as husband in private correspondence, consulting him on every major decision, deferring to his judgment on matters of state and war. He built cities in her name, conquered territories that expanded her empire to the Black Sea, created the fleet that challenged Ottoman dominance in waters Russia had never before controlled. Their partnership produced results that neither could have achieved alone. The monstrous bargain was also, in its twisted way, a functioning marriage, one that accommodated human weakness while pursuing superhuman ambitions. The machinery of selection ground into motion with Potemkin's first officially sanctioned candidate. Pyotr Zavadovsky, a 36-year-old bureaucrat who had served as secretary to the celebrated Field Marshal Rumyantsev, caught Grigory Alexandrovich's appraising eye in the spring of 1776. Before presenting this prospect to the empress, Potemkin conducted his own intimate evaluation over several nights, testing capabilities and temperament with thoroughness that would have scandalized anyone who learned of these preliminary examinations. Only after satisfying himself that Zavadovsky met the necessary standards did Potemkin escort him into Catherine's presence. She was 47, the candidate 36, a gap easily bridged by imperial desire. The affair lasted 18 months, during which Zavadovsky accumulated rewards that would have required ordinary men several lifetimes to earn. Catherine bestowed upon him the title of Count, pinned glittering orders upon his chest, transferred 4,000 human beings into his ownership as serfs. 600,000 rubles flowed into his accounts as a single payment. When the empress eventually tired of his company, Potemkin arranged a graceful exit, appointment to the Senate, a position of dignity that removed the former favorite from court without public humiliation. The transition occurred smoothly, almost bureaucratically, demonstrating how effectively the system could manage even its terminations. Next came Simeon Zorich during the summer of 1777, a 28-year-old Serbian officer serving in a hussar regiment. His magnificent mustache and fiery Balkan temperament initially delighted Catherine, who found his passionate nature refreshing after Zavadovsky's more restrained personality. But Zorich proved intellectually limited, barely capable of constructing coherent sentences in polite company. His value resided entirely in the bedchamber, which sufficed for 18 months until monotony set in. When informed that his services were no longer required, the Serbian exploded in theatrical desperation, threatening to shoot himself in the palace corridors rather than accept dismissal. Potemkin handled this crisis with characteristic efficiency. He personally bundled the hysterical former favorite into a carriage, pressed additional money into his trembling hands, and dispatched him to a remote estate in Belarus, where he could recover from his shattered dreams far from public attention. The system tolerated no scandals, no messy emotional scenes that might embarrass the empress or disrupt court business. 100,000 rubles and 1,000 serfs accompanied Zorich into comfortable obscurity. He would live well for the remainder of his days, nursing grievances that no one cared to hear. The machine had processed him and moved on to the next candidate without missing a single rotation of its gears. Ivan Korsakov arrived in 1779, a mere 21 years old, with beauty so striking that courtiers compared him to classical statuary. Golden curls framed a face of almost feminine delicacy, with eyes blue as summer sky and skin smooth as porcelain. Catherine was 50. The age difference approached 30 years, but such calculations had long since ceased troubling the empress. Korsakov received the rank of chamberlain, 50,000 rubles in annual salary, jewels and furs, and golden snuff boxes cascading upon him like rain. For 1 year he basked in imperial favor, imagining perhaps that his extraordinary beauty had earned him permanent position. Then, Potemkin discovered something that transformed his indulgent supervision into thunderous rage. The pretty fool had been conducting a secret affair with one of Catherine's own ladies-in-waiting. Not content with sharing the bed of the most powerful woman in Europe, Korsakov had risked everything for clandestine adventures with a minor noblewoman. Potemkin's fury erupted not from personal jealousy, but from outrage at the disrespect this betrayal represented. One did not deceive the Empress of Russia, did not make her appear foolish, did not treat her favor as insufficient satisfaction. He stormed into Catherine's presence, bearing evidence of the treachery. She wept, not from romantic heartbreak, but from wounded pride and profound humiliation. Korsakov was expelled from the palace within hours, thrown 130,000 rubles and an estate in Belarus, then erased from court life as though he had never existed. This debacle prompted Potemkin to refine his selection criteria. Henceforth, all candidates would come exclusively from his own staff of adjutants, men he knew personally, whose characters he had observed under various pressures, whose loyalty he could reasonably guarantee. In May of 1780, this revised approach produced Alexander Lansky, a 23-year-old officer possessing beauty, education, and genuine sweetness of disposition. Catherine was 51, and something about this gentle young man touched her more deeply than his predecessors had managed. Their relationship endured 4 years, longer than any favorite since Potemkin himself, evolving from physical arrangement into something resembling authentic emotional connection. Then, on the 25th of June, 1784, Lansky died suddenly at 26 years of age. Physicians announced diphtheria as the cause, but darker whispers immediately began circulating through palace corridors. Some voices suggested Tsarevich Paul had arranged the elimination of a potential rival to his inheritance. Others hinted that Potemkin himself, disturbed by how deeply Catherine had attached to this particular favorite, had removed a competitor who threatened the unique bond between secret spouses. No investigation occurred, no evidence emerged, and truth remained forever buried beneath layers of court intrigue. Catherine mourned genuinely, perhaps the last authentic grief she would permit herself to feel for any man besides Potemkin. The parade continued without significant pause. 13 official favorites processed through the system between 1776 and 1791. Alexander Yermolov lasted barely 12 months. Alexander Mamonov survived 2 years before repeating Korsakov's catastrophic error, falling in love with a lady-in-waiting and begging permission to marry her. Catherine granted consent with bitter grace, and another young man vanished from her life carrying his consolation prizes. The financial accounting compiled after archival revelations proved staggering beyond previous estimation. 72 million rubles expended on favorites across 34 years, approximately one-third of imperial revenues diverted to maintaining lovers in the style they expected. Each favorite occupied 15 palatial rooms furnished with French craftsmanship, Persian textiles, Italian masterworks. 20 servants attended each man, their wages drawn from state funds. Wardrobes refreshed quarterly contained garments costing 1,000 rubles per outfit. Carriages, horses, jewels, estates, human property measured in thousands of souls. The currency of imperial passion flowed without restriction while Potemkin supervised every transaction. It was madness systematized, desire bureaucratized, loneliness transformed into governmental expense, and it functioned flawlessly until death finally dismantled the arrangement. The summer of 1789 found Catherine nursing wounds that refused to heal. She had reached 60 years of age, and the latest betrayal had cut deeper than she anticipated. Mamonov, the favorite she had trusted and indulged, had abandoned her for a younger woman, one of her own ladies-in-waiting no less. The empress caught glimpses of herself in mirrors and saw what others surely saw, an aging woman clinging desperately to youth through the bodies of men young enough to be her grandsons. She swore a private oath that her heart would never again open itself to such vulnerability. The time for passion had passed. She would rule, she would govern, she would die, but she would not love again. Potemkin, however, had already identified the next candidate, and this selection would prove the most consequential mistake of his 18-year reign as master of favorites. Platon Zubov was 22 years old, an officer in the Horse Guards whose physical beauty possessed an almost unsettling quality. Pale blonde hair cascaded in carefully arranged waves around a face of delicate, nearly feminine perfection. His eyes gleamed ice gray, cold as northern seas, even when his lips curved in practiced smiles. High cheekbones and a sculpted jaw created an appearance that painters would have envied as a model. He looked like an angel descended from Orthodox iconography, and beneath that celestial exterior lurked a soul of pure, calculating ambition. The age difference between empress and candidate spanned 38 years. Catherine could have been his grandmother, could have bounced him on her knee as an infant while already ruling an empire. The absurdity of the pairing would have been obvious to anyone not blinded by desperate longing. But when Potemkin presented this exquisite young man for imperial approval, Catherine felt something she had sworn never to feel again. The familiar surge of desire, the quickening pulse, the hunger that age had failed to extinguish. She understood perfectly how ridiculous she appeared, a gray-haired sovereign panting after a boy barely emerged from adolescence. Understanding changed nothing. She wanted him, and empresses took what they wanted. Zubov recognized his opportunity with the instincts of a born predator. Where previous favorites had stumbled through their roles with varying degrees of sincerity, he approached the position as a strategic campaign to be won through careful maneuvering. He performed devotion flawlessly, whispered endearments with convincing passion, attended to Catherine's physical and emotional needs with professional thoroughness. She showered him with the standard rewards: general adjutant rank, a count's title, decorations accumulating on his chest like autumn leaves. 8,000 serfs became his property. 3 million rubles poured into his control. Within months, he had amassed wealth that established families had required generations to accumulate. But Zubov harbored ambitions that no previous favorite had dared to entertain. He refused to accept the traditional boundaries confining imperial lovers to bedchamber and ceremonial functions. Systematically, methodically, he inserted himself into the actual governance of the Russian Empire. He attended council meetings where policy was debated. He received foreign ambassadors and conducted diplomatic conversations without authorization. He appointed and dismissed ministers according to his own preferences, rewarding allies and destroying those who failed to show proper deference. The bedroom favorite was transforming himself into something far more dangerous, a shadow emperor wielding power through an increasingly dependent sovereign. Potemkin observed this metamorphosis with growing alarm from his distant military headquarters. For 18 years, his system had functioned precisely because favorites understood their place. They provided companionship and physical service. He provided strategic guidance and administrative competence. The arrangement balanced power between secret spouses while satisfying Catherine's personal needs. But Zubov was demolishing these careful boundaries, accumulating influence that threatened Potemkin's own position. The one-eyed genius attempted to warn his imperial wife, sending urgent messages describing the danger coiling within her bedchamber. Catherine dismissed his concerns as jealousy, the complaints of an aging husband uncomfortable with a younger rival's success. For the first time since their secret wedding, genuine rupture appeared between them. Potemkin had never before failed to control a favorite, never before watched helplessly as his carefully constructed system spiraled beyond his grasp. The pain of losing influence over the woman he loved proved more agonizing than any battlefield wound he had suffered. He was 52 years old, his health declining from years of excess and exertion, his magnificent body beginning to fail the ferocious spirit it housed. On the 5th of October, 1791, Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin died on a roadside in the southern steppes, far from the court he had dominated and the wife he had served. Some accounts claimed his final word was Catherine's name. The empress received news of his death and collapsed into grief more profound than any she had displayed for her string of temporary favorites. She refused food for days, would not emerge from her chambers, wept until no tears remained. She had lost her secret husband, her true partner, the only man who had ever seen her complete self and loved what he saw. Potemkin had been simultaneously her spouse, her minister, her confidant, and her protector. Now she faced the world alone, with only the cold-eyed Zubov remaining at her side. He scarcely bothered concealing his satisfaction at the rival's convenient elimination. The last obstacle between himself and absolute influence had removed itself permanently. For the following 5 years, Platon Zubov effectively governed Russia through the aging empress's increasing dependence. Catherine weakened visibly with each passing season, her legendary energy fading, her once sharp mind growing clouded, and Zubov accumulated ever more power, ever more wealth, preparing methodically for the inevitable transition he knew was approaching, understanding perfectly that her death would instantly terminate his authority and quite possibly his freedom. The autumn of 1796 arrived wrapped in gray mist and foreboding. Catherine felt the approach of her own ending, though she confessed this premonition to no one. 67 years had worn grooves into her body that no amount of imperial privilege could smooth away. Beside her still lingered the 29-year-old Zubov, but his presence no longer kindled even the faintest warmth. She clung to this final favorite as a drowning woman clutches driftwood, not from love, but from terror of facing the abyss alone. Youth had always been her talisman against mortality, and she could not release it even now. On the morning of November 5th, she awoke with a headache of crushing intensity. Court physicians urged rest, prescribed their useless remedies, begged her to remain in bed. Catherine dismissed them with characteristic impatience. Empires did not govern themselves, and documents awaited her signature. The day unfolded in ordinary rhythm. Audiences with ministers, correspondence requiring attention, a meal shared with Zubov, during which she barely touched her food. Evening came, and she retired to her private chambers, walking those familiar corridors for the final time without any awareness that tomorrow would never arrive. The woman who had survived conspiracies, wars, and the hatred of her own son prepared for sleep, not knowing she was preparing for eternity. Around 8 o'clock the following morning, servants discovered their empress collapsed on the floor of her bathroom. She lay unconscious, breathing in labored gasps, her face twisted into a grimace that would never fully relax. The physicians rushed to her side, applied the barbaric treatments their era considered medical science, bleeding her veins, forcing medicines between unresponsive lips. Nothing penetrated the darkness into which she had fallen. Catherine was dying, and no earthly power could prevent her departure. Zubov wept ostentatiously at her bedside, though whether his tears sprang from genuine grief or theatrical calculation remained impossible to determine. He had loved her crown far more than her person, and now that crown was slipping away. Word reached Tsarevich Paul Petrovich, who came racing to the Winter Palace with 42 years of accumulated hatred burning in his chest. His entire existence had been lived in his mother's shadow, the woman who had stolen his throne, possibly murdered his legal father, certainly denied him any meaningful role in governance. He had waited more than 4 decades for this moment, nursing grievances that had fermented into something approaching madness. Now, at last, his hour had struck. At 9:45 in the evening on November 6, 1796, Catherine the Great exhaled her final breath. The most powerful woman of her century had departed, leaving behind an empire, a legend, and a son consumed by vengeance. Paul moved with terrifying swiftness to dismantle everything his mother had built. He ordered Zubov arrested immediately, along with every member of his grasping family. They were expelled from the capital, stripped of significant portions of their fortune, forbidden ever to approach the new emperor's presence. But Paul's revenge extended far beyond punishing the final favorite. He commanded the exhumation of Peter III's remains from their tomb in the Alexander Nevsky Monastery. In a macabre ceremony designed to humiliate Catherine's memory, he had her murdered husband reburied with full imperial honors in the Peter and Paul Cathedral, placed beside the woman who had overthrown and destroyed him. Murderer and victim would lie together through eternity, a grotesque reunion staged by their tormented son. The new emperor then systematically erased every trace of his mother's favorites from official memory. Portraits of Orlov, Potemkin, Zubov, and the others were torn from palace walls and consigned to flames. Their names became forbidden at court, their documented honors expunged from archives. Zubov lost 3/4 of his accumulated wealth. The Orlov family saw estates confiscated. Potemkin's descendants tumbled into financial ruin. Paul promulgated new laws ensuring that women could never again inherit the Russian throne, a direct repudiation of Catherine's very existence as sovereign. For 5 years, he ruled with increasingly erratic tyranny, attempting to destroy his mother's legacy through sheer imperial will. History responded with savage irony. On the night spanning March 11th and 12th, 1801, conspirators crept through the Mikhailovsky castle where Paul had barricaded himself against imagined threats. They found the emperor cowering in his bedchamber and strangled him with an officer's ceremonial scarf. He was 46 years old, killed almost exactly as his father had been killed nearly 4 decades earlier. The son who had dedicated his reign to avenging Peter's murder met precisely the same fate, throttled by guards in his own palace. The cycle of blood completed itself with mathematical precision. In the decades following Catherine's death, monstrous legends proliferated around her memory. The most infamous claimed she had perished during unnatural relations with a horse, crushed by some mechanical apparatus designed for bestial congress. This vile fabrication spread across Europe, repeated in taverns and salons by those who delighted in degrading a powerful woman's legacy. The truth was utterly mundane. She had suffered a stroke while using her toilet, dying as ordinary mortals die. Another myth inflated her lovers from 23 to 300, transforming the empress into an insatiable creature of pure appetite. Still another legend attributed to her an erotic furniture collection discovered in the Gatchina Palace, pieces that actually belonged to Paul and his wife Maria Fyodorovna. The secret debauchery chamber supposedly hidden within the Winter Palace? Historians searched for 2 centuries and found nothing because nothing existed. Then came 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Archives that had remained sealed for generations suddenly opened to researchers, disgorging documents that rewrote everything scholars thought they knew. Catherine's personal diary emerged from a vault unopened for nearly 200 years, its pages filled with her own handwriting recording dates of assignations and candid assessments of each lover's qualities. The marriage certificate confirming her secret union with Potemkin surfaced, transforming romantic speculation into documented fact. Financial records revealed the precise sums expended on each favorite, totaling 72 million rubles across her reign. But the archives also revealed something unexpected. Many favorites had invested their imperial gifts into projects benefiting the nation. Orlov had organized quarantine measures during plague epidemics, saving hundreds of thousands of lives. Potemkin had constructed cities, founded the Black Sea Fleet, transformed empty steppes into productive territory. What remains when legend dissolves and truth emerges? Catherine was a woman of powerful appetites who refused to sacrifice her nature upon the altar of hypocritical morality. She never concealed her desires, never pretended shame for her body's demands, never cowered before condemnation from those who expected female rulers to behave as sexless icons. 23 official favorites across 34 years of reign, 500,000 square kilometers of territory annexed to the empire. 200 cities founded where wilderness had stood. The population grew from 19 million souls to 36 million under her governance. She ruled with the authority of any king and loved with the freedom of any man, entering history with the title she had earned, the Great. The archives stand open now, their secrets exposed to anyone willing to examine them. Yet the ultimate mystery of Catherine persists beyond documentary evidence. How did a penniless German girl from an insignificant principality become empress of the world's largest nation and reshape it according to her vision? The answer is simultaneously simple and unfathomable. She possessed strength. Strength greater than the circumstances arrayed against her, greater than the enemies who sought her destruction, greater than her own considerable weaknesses. She bent fate itself to her will through sheer relentless force of character. And as long as Russia endures, as long as humans remain fascinated by the collision of power and passion, the memory of Catherine the Great will never fade. Her story has reached its end, but its echoes continue reverberating through centuries yet to come.